All right. Hello and welcome to Florida Politics Now, where we are talking everything about the Florida politics. I am joined this week instead of by our usual cast, political analyst Susan MacManus. We are talking about the regular legislative session, which wrapped up last week. And so, Susan, I guess just talk about kind of how this session went.
Well, from a lot of people's perspective, it went from hope to frustration because a lot of bills got stymied or held up in one chamber or another. There suddenly was a sort of personality conflicts between the governor and the Speaker of the House, and then the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate sometimes couldn't agree on whether to push a bill in one direction or another, or components, or whether it was important or not, such that by the end of the session, it left a lot of people who follow the legislature around the state, or people who just casually tuned in to a discussion of it, to feel frustrated because we're at a state in Florida and the nation where there are a lot of problems that need to be resolved, and it's an election year. And people are looking to their legislators, people they elect, to tackle some of these very difficult problems. And not much of that happened, or not as much as usual. And the bottom line is the legislature, with all its dissension and arguing and so forth, posturing, could not do the one thing that's required by the Florida Constitution, and that's to pass a budget. So what does that mean? Now we got to go into a special session where they have to do what they should have done in the 60 days. And this is the second year in a row that that's happened. And for a lot of people, it's very disappointing.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned budget. There was rule renaissance that went nowhere in the House. You had the property taxes go nowhere in the Senate. AI affordability, all big topics that were talked about and agreed upon were issues at the beginning of session that just didn't get done.
Right. And so you asked yourself, well, look, if both the House and the Senate are dominated by Republicans to the point of where they have super majorities in each chamber, the question is, well, why can't they get something done? And the question again comes back to the fact that there's just such a split within the parties, and a lot of personalities enter into it, and a lot of lobbying goes on. And one thing to the legislators' credit, many of these legislators represent different kinds of districts. Different people live there, different issues dominate. But the commonality is that the big items that people were expecting to be resolved were left at the end of 60 days with scratching our heads. Well, what happened to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I believe it was Princess Driscoll, Democratic leader in the House, said that it was a waste of a session. There's no reason why they can't get this done during a regular session.
Mm-hmm. There were over 2,000 bills introduced. That's not unusual. Um, but I think this time, in fairness, there were a lot more major issues, some of which are very much tied to national politics and national issues. And I think we're at a point right now, even in this year's election in Florida, where the overlay of even state and local races, a lot of that is going to be the national environment. Of course, controversies, funding, all of that kind of thing. And so I think that's where we are, that yes, we wanted them to tackle some of the big issues like AI, Bill of Rights. The governor in particular and the Senate were sort of on the side there. And yes, people were very frustrated. But that particular issue is a good example of everybody agreeing on it being a big issue, particularly the protection of children. But there you have the Speaker of the House who's more aligned with the President of the United States, Trump, in saying, no, we're not going to tackle that because that issue is a national issue, not a one that should be handled by the states. And on the other hand, you've got the President of the Senate and the governor saying, no, we need to start regulating AI here. It's a state issue and we need to get ahead of it. And so there again, you have national politics. Trump the president versus DeSantis, the governor, and that is affecting how things move along. Very, very frustrating to people.
And talk about how that Trump DeSantis dynamic, because it seems like you're in one camp and not the other one in the state. And so talk about kind of how that kind of played out and seeing what we saw this session.
Very vividly apparent to anybody, because DeSantis in his State of the Union laid out some things that he expected to happen, nothing unusual, things he had long promoted, such as the AI and even some other issues like work requirements for Medicaid and some strict requirements on, data centers and the transparency of things to the public and so forth. So those were very clear, but even clearer was the interaction in person between the governor and the speaker, because the governor just ignored the speaker at an event. I think it was the State of the Union, after the State of the Union. And of course, that got written up by a lot of people like, don't you even want to talk to this person because he's key to getting things through that chamber, which you can't get bills passed if they don't pass both houses. So it was a personal conflict. And of course, DeSantis' position was, well, Perez said from the very get-go, the moment he took the speaker's chair position, that he was determined that he was going to, diss and diminish the power of the governor and increase the power of the legislature, which Perez argued had slowly let a lot of control out of its grasp and it had gone to the governor. So you have an intergovernmental battle about, between the executive and the legislative branches. So there was a lot of ideology, a lot of politics. I keep coming back to the big point, and that is people frustrated that huge issues didn't get resolved. And now it looks like we may have to go into, well, we know we have to go into another special session to pass a budget, which has to be done by June 30th, because the fiscal year begins July 1st. But then we're going to have a redistricting session. That's going to be another acrimonious thing. A lot of 55% of Floridians say they wish the legislature wouldn't do that. But that's tied to national politics of trying to get more congressional seats, Republican congressional seats, to help Trump get his agenda through Congress. And then there's a possibility of yet another special session, the one on the property tax. And everybody, once property tax relief was mentioned at the beginning of the session, everybody was hopeful that, yes, we really want property tax relief. It shows up on all the polls. And did they get anything through? No. One of the versions that's out there passed the House, but didn't get to the Senate. So now we might have to go into a special session because the governor said he's determined that the voters of Florida are going to have something to vote on in November on the ballot that deals with property tax relief. So these are all these moving parts, and deadlines keep passing by. And meanwhile, we have to keep having the legislature meet another week or two, and another week or two, and another week or two. And it just reiterates to a lot of people, well, I have to do my job, and here's what I have to have done by X. And the legislators had 60 days, and they couldn't get what they needed done. Okay, but 3 special sessions? They're asking themselves, really? It doesn't instill a lot of confidence in the Florida legislature. And sadly, it is a very critical block, piece of our government. You can't get any money through anywhere to state agencies or state employees or local governments without the legislature adopting a budget.
Yeah, and we'll be talking more about the possibility of special sessions. We know at least 2 when we come back on Florida Politics Now. welcome back to Florida Politics Now. I'm Cody Butler, joined this week by political analyst Susan MacManus, where we're talking about the legislative session that just wrapped up last week, and we know that they're going to be coming back for a special session. They have to pass a budget still, and there's another one called for redistricting as well for congressional seats. So, Susan, we know we have these special sessions, and one of them is to do the only function that the legislature is required to do.
The budget, yes.
Yeah.
And that's been scheduled for the week starting, I believe, April 20th. But there also has to be a special session on redistricting. I'm sorry, that's the one that starts on April 20th. So the question on the budget is, when is it going to be? Is it going to be after Passover, which they've agreed, both chambers are not going to go into special session until after Easter and Passover are through. So the earliest that it looks like that kind of session, which would deal with the budget, might be April 9th or somewhere thereabouts. But then the redistricting one starts April 20th. But we don't know about the one on the budget. Where's it? But we do know that it has to be done by June 30th because of fiscal year July 1. So where are they going to fit these two in? Or they are not going to combine them. That we know that. But the budget session could see some reintroduction of things that didn't make it through this last time. But right now, the two chambers, the House and the Senate, are $1.4 billion apart. They have to get together and pass a balanced budget. So you have to see negotiations and bargaining and whatever, and get it down to where the number that is passed is agreed upon by both chambers. And not a lot of time to do it, frankly. Big issues ahead. They say some of the most contentious differences between what the House and the Senate showed was keeping them apart, involved things like education, things like state employee benefits and pay, particularly health benefits, some economic development kinds of issues, housing issues, none of these unimportant issues. But somehow a lot of compromising has got to be done. And it gives the legislature a chance to repair an image. If they can get in there and get it done and agree on it and move on, which I think in some ways there is an impetus to do that, because after all, it's an election year and a lot of these people are running for re-election and they'd like to be back home campaigning. So we shall see. Is it going to be short and over quick and an agreement and sort of peace made, image improved, or is it going to be another long drawn out battle? It would behoove the legislature to take the quick path and move on. And whether they do it, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I guess the big question is how quick can they do it? Because Speaker Perez said that there were fundamental differences and that he wasn't flexible on spending more money. So if he's drawing the line in the sand, how does that affect negotiations to get this done quickly and still meet the procedural requirements needed to pass the budget?
But see, that is the whole issue. And of course, his mantra is he's trying to save taxpayers' money, and the Senate is spending it. So that's what he has made a visible pledge that he is about cutting spending. And the Senate is more about funding some things that people regard as more important than just showing that you can cut the budget. A huge question. But here's a chance to show whether the Florida legislature is now just becoming a mirror image of a Congress that can't get anything done when people are hurting, or not, and who's going to be blamed, and at what point do people within those bodies try to go over the speaker or the president of the Senate's heads. We don't know. It'd be difficult, but not impossible.
Yeah, because I know they're going to be working, at least having the conversations while they're still sorting out the budget to try to come to an agreement on basically the big number before they can talk about the smaller numbers that make up that big number. And so I guess like talk about kind of how those conversations might go when they are closer than what they were last year, but they're still more than $1 billion apart, with at least one publicly saying that he's not willing to really negotiate.
Well, what you can see usually in those negotiations, maybe there's a line or two, because most of these big ticket items have multiple parts. And maybe there's one thing that one chamber wanted really badly, but the other one didn't. And maybe that one wasn't as important to the one that didn't, as whatever. So you're going to try to first identify areas where the chambers can give one direction or another, because it's not as high on a rank order of what is essential. So going into these discussions, and each chamber has a leader that's going to sort of a leading legislator that's going to be the budget go between. They are already sitting down and looking at and talking, hopefully, about things where they can bend and things where they can't. And you start there and you try to find the little things first and whittle it down so maybe you can get closer on that number that we talked about that you got to agree on. That's the way they generally start. And then you have people that matter. This is where people back home can make a difference when the legislators say, can you write in or call or whatever and let us know which of these things is most important. Because again, it's an election year, and one of the things that having a lot of special sessions does is it minimizes the time that these legislators can go out and speak to and find out what their constituents really want. If you wait till after the Easter and Passover season and then you have to hit the ground running, then that very few people want to campaign during those religious holidays. It doesn't leave a lot of time for going back home and talking to your constituents. And believe me, they get an earful when they go home. And when they're hearing in a grocery store or whatever else, or a restaurant, there's somebody comes up to them, why aren't you doing this or that? They hear that kind of thing. And their offices hear a lot of things. I mean, it's often, I taught, as you know, Florida politics, and they used to talk about some of the best ways to influence, or, to get to call in a local legislator's local office and register complaints and whatever, because those are real people in that person's district who are saying, hey, don't do this or please do that. So this is tough times. That's why if you had 3 special sessions before the primary, which is August 18th, doesn't give legislators a lot of time to really do much campaigning.
And that's a concern I hear a lot of, because we already have the 2 on the books with the budget and redistricting. Don't know really what's going to happen with the property tax one. And then some are worried that the governor might continue to call them back and address some of the issues that they didn't address during regular session as well.
Right. And if the property tax, he could easily call a property tax special session. Or again, he could easily call an AI session back, Bill of Rights back, because there was pretty significant support for that in places, particularly the children's part of it. Yes. So you just don't know. But I think overall, the danger of this, and don't let me minimize the importance of deliberation and compromise is essential. And that's one of the things that's worrying people most of all when I go out and talk to people and ask them what they think about politics at the moment. They'll say they just wish they could get together, they wish they could compromise, and they're talking about both Congress and the state legislature. But if people's trust in their elected officials keeps going down, 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 that's a very dangerous path for democracy to take. And that's what's worrying a lot of people as well.
Yeah, and so I guess talk about um I guess what this would do, like if we do have several special sessions this summer, like what's the average voter get out of having multiple special sessions, property taxes, AI, budget, congressional redistricting?
It would absolutely depend upon what they think that the legislature should be addressing. And what's the judge of that? 99%. It's what's affecting an individual voter or their family or someone they care about deeply. And we know from everything we're looking at, all the polls that have been done of late, it's all about the cost of living, it's housing, it's insurance costs, it's property taxes, property insurance, healthcare, all these things. So if I really, really care about, let's say, healthcare costs or whatever, I am going to hope that the legislature during its budget session addresses that. In contrast, if I don't understand redistricting or care about that, whatever they do isn't going to matter to me. But for somebody else who feels misrepresented or underrepresented now, that could be a big issue that maybe my vote kind of finally seems to be counting more. Or the property tax, a lot of people are interested in that. The issue with property tax, everybody agrees with the problem, but they don't agree on the solution. And so you have those that would like to totally get rid of property taxes. Well, we know from when that discussion came up in the legislature, all the local governments back home said, well, that's our major source of revenue. So I'm going to have to cut out what? My police department, this, that, and the other. And so the impact on the local governments were really loud, and they said, we can't survive without this. And it means that there's a little bit less reticent to just get rid of it, because then you definitely couldn't get the 60% required passage, 60% voter approval to pass that. But what about some exemptions? Or what about some, reductions in rate? Those are other things. But there is a lot of discussion among everyday people, like if they can't address the property tax issue, what good are they? I mean, that's an example of how an issue that is so ultra important to a person's livelihood, and the government does nothing or even attempts to do nothing that gives voters a say, the likelihood they're going to vote goes down.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much, Susan. That's all the time we have for this week's edition of Florida Politics Now. We'll be right back here again next week.